Hi, Andres. How are you?
Good. How are you, Toni?
I'm great. I'm excited. You know how much I love you.
You know how much I love you too, because we're part of the same tribe of amazing people,
We
trying to change
are.
people's lives.
We are. Tell everyone about, I mean, we're jumping right in. Tell everyone about your podcast and so that they can listen to that episode that we did together with like 7 other amazing nutrition experts.
Sweet. Plugging things in right away. I
Right
love it.
away.
So my podcast name is Viva Nutrition Radio. It's essentially a podcast about fitness and health and performance, and it's in Spanglish. So I actually do some episodes in Spanish because I am Hispanic. I'm from Venezuela. And the episode you're talking about, I think it's episode, I believe it's 39. And it's you, me, and 7 or 6 other amazing dietitians and nutrition coaches. We rounded up together in a mentorship retreat that we had in Costa Mesa, and we talked about what people don't want to hear about, but that's the truth behind nutrition coaching, and really what people don't always necessarily see results, and always trying to find something so quick to just try to get to, which we're going to talk about one of those methods that people kind of seek for in our conversation here today.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so excited. So yeah, guys, if you haven't subscribed to his podcast, subscribe to it. I'll put it in the show notes. But that episode along with all the others, if you're really looking for a reliable nutrition resource, which I know that's why people come to my podcast, I'm not the only one. There's other people, other perspectives, you can connect with. So definitely go check that out. Okay, so anyways, before obviously we're talking all about intermittent fasting. I got all the questions here. Before we get into that, just please introduce yourself and let people know who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do.
Amazing. Great question. So my name is Andres Ayesta. I am a registered dietitian originally from Venezuela. I've been here in the US for about 10 years. I practice I do have also an online nutrition coaching business. And I'm based out of Tampa, Florida. So warm, sunny, and super humid Florida. And so I became a registered dietitian here in the US, and I have a master's in exercise science, certifications in sports dietetics. I actually worked a lot with NFL athletes and Major League Baseball players for a long time. So that's kind of like where a lot of my background came from. And then I kind of switched my gears more towards like general population. The reason why I do the things that I do is to be able to, like, the why of my nutrition coaching program and why I do those things is because I want to be able to provide people impact and life performance. In life performance, what I kind of define in that is just being your best self in every single thing that you do in life, mentally, physically, emotionally. And I believe that a lot starts with the way that you feel your body. And I teach people how to actually take care of that in the same way that they can start taking care of their mental health, their emotional health. And a lot of times when you pair all those things together and you actually kind of like achieve a state in which like all those are optimized, you achieve that maximal capacity that which you can actually live life, which is
Totally.
really like what I help my people or my tribe accomplish in that
Yeah.
way.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Nutrition first, everything else second. I think people have it opposite. They always think that they'll take care of their nutrition when they're older, but like, what's the point when they're sick then and your habits are shot? And then you're just like, oh, I only have 20 more years left of my life to live. So,
Yeah, you got to
but
take care
yeah,
of that right now.
yeah, totally, totally. So, okay. So the reason why I wanted to have you on is because I get a lot of questions about intermittent fasting. And I know that I know you help your clients with some of your clients, like, and we're going to go over who it's for and who it's not for. But I think I remember you utilizing this strategy once before.
Yes, personally, you mean?
Yeah. So like you have personal experience, but also professional experience in teaching other people,
Correct.
which I really respect. And so as knowledgeable as I am about the topic, I've like kind of dabbled in it, but I've never really tried it seriously. And I'm a huge believer in the people who can teach, in the sense of like, you have to try it on your own first. So I'm really interested in hearing kind of, your experience with it, and then obviously educating others about it. But before we get into that, if you could just explain what intermittent fasting is. A lot of people, I know, they hear about it, but I'm not sure they clearly understand what that means.
Yeah, I love that question. And I usually kind of start off with the first one, which is what intermittent fasting is not. It is not a diet, which a lot of people actually associate it because they kind of hear it on like, in news outlets and things like that. It's like, I'm going to try this intermittent fasting thing, thinking that it's kind of like the specific diet they're going to follow. It's a meal schedule. It's a restricted amount of time in which you're actually limiting yourself to consuming foods and by way or fasting. So, and that can be defined as, simple as a overnight fast, which we all practice intermittent fasting, believe it or not, which is obviously have shorter duration of times. Like, when you go to bed around 10 o'clock and you wake up around 6 or 7 and you don't eat anything until 8 o'clock or 9, that you're almost having almost like a 11 to 12 hour fast. So that technically is intermittent fasting, is a time restriction in which you have a period of time, or a window of time in which you're fasted, and the other time you're consuming food, basically. It's as simple as that. Just people just make it out to be this kind of like crazy, super fancy like diet, and there isn't such a thing as that. It's just simply a meal schedule.
Yeah. So going off of that, I think to kind of get through some of the misconceptions about it, it's not a diet. It's a meal schedule, as you said. So do you find that when people think it is a diet, they then therefore feel they can eat whatever they want within the time window? Have you seen that before?
Yeah, it's kind of like the same thing that applies to like ketogenic diets. Like, I can eat all the fat in the world, so I can eat all the cheese and butter. The same thing with intermittent fasting. Well, as long as I eat things within my time restricted period, then that makes it good, or that makes it okay. And that's actually how I started doing it, like not necessarily like obviously with the mindset of a dietitian, like making sure I take like the right foods and all that, but not necessarily controlling what I was consuming. So the thing about that meal schedule, especially when you extend it to the typical intermittent fasting regime that most people know about, which is 16-8, which is 16 hours fasted, 8 hours eating, then you're more likely, because you're so reduced with the amount of time that you can consume food, that you may end up creating a smaller calorie deficit, because there's just not enough time to eat as much as you would actually do when you're having a breakfast choice or a snack in the morning. So I think people do have a misconception that they can have whatever they want to. On the same token, I feel like even if they tried, a lot of times it's really difficult to get as many calories in that same period of time, unless you have a bigger appetite, which some people do. And some of my clients, or some of the people that came to me that said the intermittent fasting didn't work out for them, it's because when we go and look at their logs and their tracking, like I can see like an insane amount of calories they're consuming at nighttime, and they're binge eating and things like that.
Right.
And that can obviously lead to not greater things, because there's just no control. So when you do intermittent fasting, it needs to be structured and properly, it needs to be a properly formulated program for it to work and for it to get the benefits that you're looking to have out of it.
100%. And I love what you just said there, because I think a lot of people hear about intermittent fasting and they're like, oh, this might work. And then they recognize, wait a minute, I'm kind of already doing that, right? How many people do you know don't eat breakfast, barely eat all day, get home from work and binge eat and then go to sleep? So like, yeah, you're intermittent fasting, but it's not helping you. And it's not only is it not helping you physically, but mentally that can't be healthy. Right. And
yeah, and I was just going to add to this, because some of like the most overweight and obese clients I've ever worked with, most of them don't ever have breakfast.
They barely eat.
You would think,
totally.
You would think like, oh, like I am, they're technically doing intermittent fasting.
Right.
Literally, I was just having a conversation with one of my clients who, has some extra weight. And then he's like, I went to the golf course. I didn't really have anything to eat until 3 o'clock, until I realized it, not on purpose. But then usually that leads to those episodes of like overeating and very poor nutritional quality foods at nighttime, because it's the time where your body's kind of passing you the bill. It's like, okay, hey, you haven't really been giving enough food. And the way I kind of explain to many people, it's like the way that your body reacts to that. And I always use the example of a sumo wrestler. And I ask people, how a sumo wrestler trains, or how, because usually a sumo wrestler, their goal is to actually get as fat as they can, because the bigger the size is, the better it is for them. So I ask him, how many meals do you think they have on a daily basis? And they say, oh, girl, nine meals, like 10 meals, 12 meals. No, they have one. Lots of beer and lots of food in one setting, because their goal is to ensure that they can store as much fat as they possibly can. And they usually fast throughout the entire day in order for that to happen. So that's what a lot of people don't understand, because when you kind of condition your body to do that, and obviously providing not greater nutritional quality, hence the beer that they were actually kind of having at that time, you're kind of like sensing, you're telling your body like, hey, listen, and your body's saying like, this is the last time we're going to get a food for the next 24 hours. We might as well store it. So this is exactly what kind of happens in those kind of scenarios, unless you do it in a very structured and high nutritional quality program, where intermittent fasting can and will be actually effective with so many people.
Right. So here, I'm just going to ask all the questions I know that people who are listening are definitely thinking. Like, totally understand what you're saying. Totally get it. But it's also so confusing, right? Because here you are saying, okay, if we eat one meal, then your body is going to think it's starving. It's going to slow down your metabolism and it's going to store fat. Yet we're also saying there, like, let's explain what the actual theory is between time restricted eating, right? And aren't there theories about the way that certain, like, maybe insulin is secreted, or like how your body stores fat, and like the science behind it in that sense? Like, is there a way you can kind of break down the differences of like high quality nutrition and time restricted eating versus low quality nutrition and time restricted eating?
Absolutely. I think actually after I said it, I was like, okay, this is going to sound now very confusing when I just provided that example.
Listen, Andres, I had my friend Michelle was on the podcast. She's a registered dietitian too. And I'm like, at the end, I'm like, people are probably very confused. She's like, good, they should be, because they need to hire nutrition professionals to help sift through it, because there's not one size fits all approach. And you need to know what fits best for you one-on-one. So she's like, good, I hope they're confused. And I'm kind of thinking like, yeah, you know what, maybe I hope they're confused too.
No, but they're confused, and that's good that they are, because obviously this opens up for debate, and I think it's great. When I'm saying like the whole thing about the one meal per day, I'm actually talking about like hypercaloric meals, so meaning like more calories than what their body requires. Mm-hmm. They're feasting, they're eating way more than their basically the energy expenditure, and obviously that is a mistake. So, but going back to more like the reasoning behind time restricted feeding, really what is the mechanism that exists by which actually could be more effective than a regular calorie restriction? So there's this term known as low energy availability, which is basically a state in which your body doesn't have enough energy to pull from food. So it's always going to resort to its own body resources, essentially, to be able to provide energy. Now, that low energy availability is supposed to be the mechanism by which everything happens in your body. There's a lot of like signaling things in your body, like this little kind of like switches on and off that essentially are telling your body like, hey, there's not enough food. Let's adapt to create mechanisms that we can resolve to essentially use our body stores to essentially burn more fat and oxidize more fat. And there's some research to support that, essentially saying that, for example, when people fast, and they don't eat anything until like 1 o'clock or so, their body becomes better at oxidizing fats compared to, for example, somebody that would have a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner and have less time in between meals for that reason. So that's number one. And that is also tied up with the insulin secretion thing that you were talking about, which is actually when you're not consuming food, insulin is usually normalized. There's no spikes, ups and downs. But then this is very, it's kind of hard to explain too, because you can always kind of get the same effect if you're actually consuming foods regularly, but then you're choosing the good quality options, for example, carbohydrates and like the complex carbohydrates and things of that sort. But overall, just to kind of get the bigger picture of all this, the reasoning behind intermittent fasting is to create a state in which your body would adapt to hopefully use more fats more effectively, comparatively speaking to when you were consuming foods every so often throughout the day and snacking and so forth. That's like the main aspect of it. And we can go very deep into this because I speak a lot on all these different things. But again, like the mechanisms of this, it's literally thinking about the switches and on and off that are helping your body to adapt to a circumstance that is being put in. It's kind of like if you were stranded on a desert and literally I would leave you there with, let's just say, enough water for the sake of this example. There's some stages your body goes through in which is basically adapting to use like its own body stores very effectively to be able to survive. The human body can, like the average human body, like you and I, can probably survive up to like 30 to 40 days without any kind of food. Granted that we're actually staying properly hydrated and proper electrolyte balance. So if that's the case, your body has enough stores to be able to do that. Now, the stages of which your body needs to go through to get to that point, you would have to fast for 3 to 4 days, in which like that's when your body goes like, oh, like there, guess what? We do have some fat that we can use, and now we can actually use this effectively. But of course, nobody does that, and I'm not actually recommending or condoning like for anybody to go and fast for 4 to 5 days, even though some people do it. But this is just like kind of like the reasoning behind it. It's that state that kind of creates the adaptation for your body to use fats more effectively, essentially.
Right. So, okay. So scientifically and studying the human body, it works and it's effective. But then it also goes back to, we can't forget about basic principles of like, how does it make you feel, right? How are your energy levels? And is this something that works for you? So I just want to kind of reiterate that. It's like, just because the science says one thing doesn't mean that's something that we need to jump on and get to. I think what you're basically saying is that if your body's in a caloric deficit, whether it's doing it by intermittent fasting or by doing it by eating 3 meals a day, you're still going to lose weight. However, you might be more efficient at losing weight if you also are eating really healthy food and you have a caloric deficit within time restricted eating.
Correct.
So I always want to like kind of point that out to people that I believe nutrition and the way we go about our health should be done in stages, in the sense that if you're brand new to healthy eating, like kind of going back to who this is not for, if someone has barely ate vegetables in their life, right? Like, they really have like they're not sleeping well, they're not exercising, they're high stress. Like, would you recommend it? And you could say how you feel. I wouldn't, but I want to know, would you recommend intermittent fasting for them at first? Or is this something that they establish healthy eating habits at first and then can go to that as like a next strategy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't ever impose or like put any of my clients through any kind of dietary regimes, including fasting, for a couple of reasons. First, number one is like what you're saying. I would never put somebody that is like never actually had a healthy type of diet to put it. Those are some things that I call advanced strategies.
Right.
And when somebody comes to me already doing it, and I know for a fact that this is for example, I usually split my clients in 3 levels, like level 1, level 2, level 3. Mm-hmm. Level 1 is somebody that has no clue on nutrition. Like, they're just starting. They're just trying to lose weight. They're just completely clueless. It's like you're saying, they never had vegetables in their life. A level 2 is somebody that it kind of eats healthy, but it has like massive education. And level 3 is somebody that has the education, they just need the accountability, and then like the next thing that they may be missing. So for a level 1, somebody that has no clue, like I would never put them through that, but maybe they progress throughout the program working with me to a level 3, a level 2. Totally. And then that's when I introduce it as a way to, obviously, they just kind of change it up. I'm a big fan of never kind of staying in the comfort zone in your nutrition, always kind of trying the different things as long as you can kind of sustain it for long. Right. So that's hence the reason why actually I implement every single thing I teach, I implement it on myself first. Mm-hmm. Because like you're saying at the beginning, like I want to practice what I preach and I want to make sure that I walk the line. So I would never recommend it to somebody that is just starting, but I may bring it up in the future if I feel like they would be fit enough and I consider them to be, you know, a good person that would be great for it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give you an example of like a level 3 that I actually told this morning that I don't think intermittent fasting is good for you. Great. So she's a female. She's a very competitive CrossFit athlete. And she saw mine because I created a video course, which, you know, we'll talk about later. But essentially she downloaded, she was super excited and everything. She said, and she started implementing fasting, and she didn't tell me anything. And if she listening to this, she's going to laugh about it. But then she didn't tell me anything until her check-in. And it's like, hey, listen, stop. Don't do that yet. We need to talk about it first. So we had a conversation in our coaching call this morning. And I said, listen, you are training twice a day. First of all, you train at 6 a.m. in the morning. You have a very busy day, school and work. And then you go back to train in a second session at nighttime, anywhere between 7 to 8, up until sometimes 10 o'clock. We're barely trying to work on your sleep right now as it is. So do you really think you're going to be able to fit in, number one, fit in on your calories, because she's in a very high calorie state right now, from a period of time that would go from, like, if you wanted to do a 16 hours of fasting, technically from 3 until 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And she's like, no, I don't think I can definitely do that. And I was like, I don't either. So I'm going to give you the education behind fasting, because she always wanted to do it because of the health benefits. And I said, you can get the same health benefits from caloric restriction. And honestly, you're progressing so well because you're doing amazing. So it's like, you're progressing so well by doing the way you're doing things. So why would we need to actually include that? So that's an example of a level 3 client that doesn't really need to do it to get superior results. You know, on the opposite, on contrast to a guy that I'm currently working on, we just started the process. He is started at level 1, progressed to a level 2, and now he's actually started to implement it and actually doing great. He loves it. He is hungrier at nighttime, which actually makes perfect sense because it's the time that he can actually have bigger meals, and it's also the time that he trains. So we can take the time of training to actually optimize that. So we look and is a very individual case. But here's like just to kind of finish up this idea. I always educate my clients and like that, and I explain to them like the pros, the cons, like the advantages, disadvantages in their case. And I said, what's your decision? I don't ever put it on, impose it on them, but I just let them come up with the conclusion whether or not it's the right thing or not. But I usually put it in a way that the conclusion is going to be pretty obvious. I don't think I should do this.
I'm the same. It's fine. This is my professional opinion. This could work, but this is what I think is better.
Yeah. So we just kind of try to put it in that kind of state. But then honestly, when some clients want to do it and want to try it, I'm not going to tell them no. I was like, I'll help you. But sometimes like you have to let them kind of like kick themselves a little bit and to really understand exactly how it may actually not be the greatest idea. And some points while for some others, it definitely could be.
Yeah, and it's always better to try something under the care of a registered dietitian than kind of doing it on your own, because, you know, we can be there to say, you know, listen, if you want to continue on this journey, here's the suggestions I have for you. Or if you're not going to do it, most people, if they're not under the supervision of a dietitian and they don't have the accountability, they try something, it doesn't work, and now they just stop taking care of their health in general. 6 months go by and like, what happened? No, they made zero changes, right? Whereas when you're working with someone, it's like, okay, that didn't work, no problem. Here's the next step. And it's like, you didn't even miss a beat. And I agree with you. I think sometimes it's kind of like a parent who tries to warn someone about dating. It's like, I don't think he's good for you. And sometimes, you know what, the girl just has to date the wrong men to really realize, that's okay. You have to, as much as your parents warned you, it's not enough. You have to go through it yourself. So I completely agree with that. I completely relate to it. Speaking of athletes, you mentioned the CrossFit athlete. You also mentioned this guy being able to do intermittent fasting, but it was great because the feeding time was around time of exercise. Can you talk about like intermittent fasting and like fasted cardio and how it affects nutrition performance? Because I used to be a big proponent of nutrition, like food for fuel. And I think I still kind of am, but I've also been like hearing and reading. And I also believe that nutrition is a science and it's always changing. And like, I have been reading and about there are more studies that are coming out that are saying the opposite. And so obviously I want to stay up to date, and I'm just curious what you've come across.
So it all depends on the goal. If the goal is performance, it depends on the training load or training volume of the person. So if we're looking at a competitive athlete and their goal is and their training load or volume is pretty high, like they're training 2 to 3 hours a day, fasting in the morning and while at the time that they're training may not be the most effective strategy. So think an NFL athlete that goes through, like I have a couple of them that I work with, or an NHL hockey player that plays for Lightning here in Tampa. He trains like 2 to 3 hours pretty high intensity. So this guy is not going to like be able to support a fasting state, being the goal, being performance. Now, I'm going to also talk about me as my personal experience. My best workouts, I do CrossFit and I do pretty high intensity stuff, but I don't really do it for 2 to 3 hours. Mm-hmm. For me, my best workouts are actually done fasted. But there's obviously a lot of strategies that people can implement for this. And this could be, for example, like carbohydrate backloading, which is essentially like a strategy in which you add a lot more carbohydrates at nighttime. So you have full glycogen loads. Essentially, your kind of like carbohydrate tank is full. So your workouts are actually much better in the morning because of that same reason. Also, it depends on the amount of time that you've allowed your body to adapt. Right now, I still practice intermittent fasting because it works for me. And I know that my body is more conditioned right now to be able to sustain long periods of time without eating because I have let my body adapt to that state. Mm-hmm. And I can literally go right now. I haven't had anything since last night, and go and have a CrossFit workout and completely crush it. Even in kind of like a long duration one, let's say an hour and a half, and still be totally fine with it and not necessarily feeling like my performance is affected. So it's highly individualized. Now, from the mechanism perspective or mechanistic and like the scientific perspective, again, it's going back to that low energy availability state. If that is the possibility and then your body adapts to it, it's going to resolve to try to use fat oxidation as a main source of fuel too, or a mix of that, along with the glycogen that has been stored from the night before to be able to sustain that. But lastly, if fat loss is the goal, you can, like, fasted cardio is not more superior than regular cardio if there's no caloric restriction being imposed on a daily basis.
Totally.
If you're not really creating that, like, calorie deficit on a daily basis, whether you do fasted cardio, sure, you're going to oxidize more fat in your fasted cardio, but at the end of the day, you're actually consuming as many calories or more than what your body requires. That kind of, like, knocks it off.
Right.
Basically, it doesn't really, like, it doesn't work. Although if you're creating a calorie deficit, fasted cardio is more superior than others. I think I'm inclined to think that it may, but it's not necessary. Putting it that way, because I feel like a lot of, like, bodybuilders and, like, physique athletes, like, they just kind of push the fasted cardio. There are benefits to it, depending on the type of training that you're doing. I just think, like, you need to look at the bigger picture also, not just necessarily that you're going to step on a treadmill or a Stairmaster for 30 minutes every morning fasted. You're automatically going to increase, definitely going to increase the calorie expenditure, which is good. But if you're not really controlling your food intake, then obviously it's worthless.
Yeah. And just, I think the biggest takeaway from that is it's person specific, because I really can't do fasted exercise. Like, I've tried, and I'm someone who has a good relationship with my food choices. I keep track of my food. I would consider myself an advanced eater. And you're right. It depends on the type of workout, but, like, it depends on the type of workout. And I think mostly, I can't say I can't do it, but I think it has a lot to do with what I ate the night before, or if I ate the night before. Because there were times where I would try to do the fasting and I'd stop eating at 4 and then try to wake up and do a fasted. And that was just too much for me. Like, and I really think it goes back to everyone's very different. But also that, you have to remember, like, how is this going to affect my mood, my energy, and then afterwards? So, like, because you have a healthy relationship with food, because you have a good understanding of your nutrition, because you're tracking in other ways, you can get home after a huge workout, not eating for 16 hours, and sit down and have a balanced lunch that's nutritious and filling, rather than rummaging through the cabinets, just trying to stuff your face, because you are, like, no control over your food choices, right? So going back again, I would agree with you. I love that you have, like, a level 1, level 2, level 3. It sounds like this is very much for a level 3 person, possibly, or a level 2 if you're working with the right professional.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think, like you're saying, like, back to the example, like, anybody that has a history of binge eating, it's somebody that I would not recommend fasting for, because you're actually having to have bigger meals. Like, we're not talking about, like, creating, and this is something that applies a lot to people that have that history, and specifically women, because of their reproductive aspect of things. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. When you're doing intermittent fasting and you create a bigger kind of caloric restriction, then you may start to affect hormonal balance in women particularly, and then you kind of start to see, like, missed periods. It's not because of the fasting state, it's just mostly because a lot of times the restriction that most women may be creating when they're doing this. And on the other side, if there's somebody with history of binging, then you're going to start to see, like, people may have that doesn't really have a healthy relationship with food. Is like you're saying, like, they may actually go in, and if they're not controlling their food intake, like, I actually have one of my good friends. I just got back from Colombia, and I spent, like, a week with her and my fiance. And she did intermittent fasting for a while, but she would not eat anything. But she would just completely devour her kitchen at nighttime, like, completely. And she always said, like, intermittent fasting didn't work for me, obviously, because she didn't really kind of have the right kind of approach to it because of the relationship that she had with food. So I think that's another kind of like flag that I would look at when I'm trying to recommend intermittent fasting with somebody, because like I agree 100% with you. Like, it may not be a good idea for somebody now, but I'm going to tell you one thing though. When a lot of people say, like, I can't do this, and I'm going to call you out very respectfully, is when somebody says, like, I can't do this, I would never be able to do it, it's because you never actually allow your body to be uncomfortable long enough to allow it to become a comfortable thing. So what do I mean by that? I'm a big believer in the psychology of hunger, right? So hunger it's a physiological signal, but it's mostly emotional. So whenever you feel like you haven't eaten anything in any kind of given moment, you freak out. And not necessarily a bad freak out, but you're like, I just haven't had anything to eat. You're actually telling your body, like, there's no fuel in the system, so we're not going to perform to the best peak. When you kind of change that narrative, because hunger actually comes in waves, when you kind of change that narrative, usually things like start to change. I'm not saying that the stuff that you feel sometimes when you're fasted and you're working out are not real. They are very real, but a lot of times it could be like a mind-body connection, because I believe in a lot of that stuff. So it's kind of like allowing. That's why I usually tell people, like, before we jump into an intermittent fasting program, I want to make sure that you understand that this is a commitment that we're making for at least 3 months, because otherwise there's just not going to be a chance for us to understand whether it's something effective or not. Same thing applies to ketogenic diets. Like, people always kind of go and resort to this kind of like quick, supposedly like, weight loss solutions, without understanding that you have to really push your body long enough to understand the benefits of that. And if you don't, and you don't have the patience or the education or the guidance to accomplish that, then you might as well not even start in the first place. So for me, one of the things, the biggest lessons that I have learned from intermittent fasting is like I said, hunger is it's a huge, a big part psychological trait, that if you allow it to, when you have developed a good relationship with food, you allow yourself to control it, things go a lot bit better. Like, for example, think about a time that you went out, right? And then you stayed up until like 1 or 2 o'clock, and you slept in until like 12 o'clock. Remember your college days. You didn't wake up at like 7 o'clock to have your breakfast. No, you slept through the night, because again, you were sleeping. So you were not really thinking about it. So again, you change your biological clock that specific day on a time that you normally would have breakfast, and you skipped it, yet nothing happened because you were not thinking about it. So there's a big component on psychology that applies to intermittent fasting that a lot of people don't really talk about, but they could be bigger benefits. Make sense?
It makes so much sense. And I'm so grateful for you, for calling me out, because I kind of even heard myself saying it. Like, I was thinking that. So it's like, I needed to hear that. But also, we didn't even talk about this, and I think it's really important. Like, a lot of people do fast for religious reasons, or to get closer to God, or whatever it is, right? You can't hear me? Uh-oh. I'm not going to pause the recording because I don't know how to edit this.
You pause it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hold on.
Okay. I didn't pause it. We're just going to have to crush through it, or I'll try to edit in GarageBand. I am not the best at podcasting. Let's just say that. I used to have someone do it for me.
Perfect now.
You can hear me? Okay.
Sorry.
Anyways,
sorry for
totally fine. We'll see. I might edit it. I might not. So who knows? Everyone gets to see that, I'm not really, I might be a nutrition expert, but I'm definitely not a podcast expert. So what I was saying is that, one, thank you for calling me out. Two, a lot of people do fasting for religious reasons as a way to get closer to God, or to develop a healthier relationship with themselves. And like you were expressing, that mind-body connection. I totally feel that, and I kind of know it. I feel like for me, it is kind of my next step, and I've dabbled in it before, but like you said, you really need to be working with someone and trying it for, you said what, 3 months?
Yeah.
3 months to really know if it's something that's worth it. And no one has that patience, but I know that it would work. So, but like, yeah, so like that, I think that's a really great thing, is that I think people don't give things long enough, like try it long enough to really think if it works, or they try something that's not good for them for way too long. And they just have the misconception of like, is it working? So I guess going off of that a little bit, so we talked about like, if you have a poor relationship with food, it's not for you. I say if you have a history of an eating disorder, or disordered eating habits, that it's not really great for you. If you want to improve your mind-body connection, it is one way to do that. So that's what you were saying. And then you mentioned, so we kind of got off a little bit, but I did have this in my notes. So I did want to talk about this. You mentioned some people, you said they might do intermittent fasting, but they don't do it long enough and they give it up. Same thing with keto. I know you have you have a huge extensive background. You were in a clinical dietitian and you treated people with, am I right with that? I feel like I heard you on Toni's podcast.
For keto, not necessarily, no, but it was more like I worked in a facility where there was a lot of researchers that spent a lot of time in keto, and there was a lot of applications to clinical patients like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and cancer, with, ketogenic applications, and also some intermittent fasting as well. So that's where I kind of got a lot more exposure to it. And in fact, I work under Dr. Jacob Wilson, Dr. Ryan Larry. They wrote a book called The Ketogenic Bible. So I learned a lot under them on the benefits that you may kind of experience as a result of those kind of like dietary approaches, specifically in clinical populations.
Right, exactly. And then that kind of also goes back to what we were saying before, is like the science says one thing, application is another thing.
Yeah.
And I'm stay up to date on that research for sure. And all those disease states that you mentioned are carbohydrates trigger the brain. So it makes sense that going on something that's low carb, high fat would be beneficial. However, not everyone's in a clinical setting under the care of professionals, and that's always not how it looks. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll have you back to talk about keto, because I don't want to confuse people. However, I do wanted to bring about the fact that usually keto and intermittent fasting are done together. And one very popular thing is we went back to talking about that fasted state of not eating anything and say until like 2-3 o'clock. But usually what's allowed in that is usually like a bulletproof coffee, right? Or something like coffee with a ton of either butter or coconut oil. Can you please explain to me how that's acceptable? And I'm just gonna let you talk. Help me understand.
So for people listening in, if you want to add 600 calories worth of butter and oil to your coffee, by all means. I don't see the benefit of that. Have I done it? Yes, I have. So essentially, there is some reasoning to it. Of course, I mean, there's people that just came up with that, and well, I mean, sometimes like you see that a lot, but then no, there's obviously some reasoning behind that. So the composition of basically bulletproof coffee, it's technically butter and then coconut oil. So the reasoning for that is because it provides a fat source that your body can essentially, first of all, you don't have an insulinogenic response out of that coffee, number one. Number two, technically speaking, coconut oil has higher concentration of MCTs. And MCTs is a type of oil that your body doesn't require this thing called micelles. So think about when you actually have like olive oil or other kinds of fats, you're in your digestive system, your body has to like create these little bubbles to engulf those fat molecules in order for you to absorb it. So that process is lengthy. It takes a lot of time. So in the case for MCTs, which is actually mainly the main composition of some butters and also like coconut oil, mainly it's kind of like there's not a need for that. So you absorb it a lot faster. So you use it for energy a lot quicker. So it kind of bypasses a lot of things. The reasoning for doing that is because it provides an alternative source of energy in the morning. That's really it. But then again, it's kind of like trying to get too many calories in one drink when in reality, it keeps you fuller. That's the other part too. It kind of keeps you fuller. It kind of keeps you more satiated. So you don't necessarily have this like need to consume food. So those are like the two main reasons for it. I don't think it's the most approach. Just drink your coffee and eat your fats and other kinds of sources and foods like a lot better. Even if you want to add that butter to like your vegetables and options like this, then actually that's going to be even more beneficial because now you're actually increasing the absorption of obviously certain vitamins through the fat that you're consuming, but not necessarily your coffee, unless, like I said, it's something that, you know, it's kind of habitual for you and you're able to kind of fit in your fats like for the rest of the day, that proper way.
Well, that's exactly right? Like you still, once again, it goes back to if your goal is fat loss, you still need a caloric deficit. So if you're having 600 calories from a cup of coffee, like you're probably not going to be getting enough nutrients from your food. So it kind of goes back to like, if you only care what the scale says at the end of the week, sure, great. But if you really want like long-term, proper nutrition, and like you said, the absorption from food is usually when certain food combinations are put together, then there's going to be a bigger, there's a much better reason, I would say,
and just to kind of add on to that, like a true fast is nothing. It's water. And that's why a lot of times, like when people ask me like, oh, can I do this and can I do that? I mean, it's a modified fast, but it's not a true fast. If you're having like even coffee now, I do have coffee in my fasted state. I do have stevia to it. Do I consider myself like I'm doing like this super strict intermittent fasting regime? No, it's a modified fast, and I'm totally okay with that. Mm-hmm. But then most people kind of like start to ask like a bunch of stuff like, can I have like a diet soda in the morning? Can I have like an energy drink in the morning? It's like that kind of defeats the purpose because you're still adding substances into your system, which in reality, what you're trying to kind of create is a full state of fasting at that point. Mm-hmm. So technically speaking, a full, very regimented fast is water only. So that's why when you're adding those kind of things, you're still adding a ton of calories. So that's not a true fast. You're just drinking a ton of calories in the morning and as a form of breakfast. That's all.
Right, totally. And it's a missed opportunity for nutrition. So to me, that's
Yeah,
not really a breakfast. Like a breakfast
exactly.
has at least three food groups, and it's well balanced. So
Exactly.
I agree with that. And then, one other question. Like, so we talked about like a goal being fat loss. What about people who have a goal of like better, maybe like bowel movements, or they have like digestive issues? Have you read any research
Mhm.
about that?
There's actually some research and some scientific data on fasting and gut health. Not super familiar with it, but I know that it can sort of help in some ways because of the fact, again, you're just reducing the activity of your bowels for a while, like, or like a hyperactivity of your bowels for a specific amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
But it also depends on what you're having at the times that you're eating.
Right.
Like I said, if you're not having a proper balanced meal and now you're actually kind of like completely losing it, eating foods that are just going to make you feel satisfied, not controlling it, then obviously it kind of defeats the purpose of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's obviously benefits, like there are some benefits of like, low carb, high fat diets on like gut health, especially people that have a lot of sensitivities and things of that sort, a lot of bloating and aspects of that. There are some benefits to doing that. But again, it all depends, because if you're trying to have a higher calorie state and you're not in a massive restriction, your meals are going to be pretty big. And for some people that have gut health issues, that may be a problem,
Right.
because
So it
again,
might be the opposite.
it might be the opposite. So again, it's a very personal thing. I
Mm-hmm.
do think there's benefits to it, but a lot of times translating the research into the applicable part of things, it becomes really difficult
Totally.
from that perspective.
Totally. Yeah, that was great. That was really great. Okay, awesome. I mean, I think that I asked all the questions. Is there anything that you wanted to add, or I definitely want to I want to ask you about your course and where people can find that.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, like I said, usually when I have like this podcast and talk a lot about intermittent fasting, it's just don't, for people listening in, don't get hyped up on it because of what you hear on social media.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally just a way to create a restriction that you can create not doing it. You just need to be smart about it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why you need to kind of work with a registered dietitian or nutrition coach that knows about this stuff and can kind of help you and guide you in the right direction on this. Like I said, intermittent fasting is not a magic pill. It's not a magic solution. It's just simply a method that if it applies to you, like it applies to me. And like I said, when I did this, anytime that literally I heard about this from the first time in 2015, and it was because a friend of mine told me, like, hey, like, have you heard about the Wolverine diet? And I was like, what do you mean Wolverine diet? And it's like this guy, Hugh Jackman, he, like the actor, he actually started to apply intermittent fasting. He got jacked, pun intended. So he actually so I started reading about it because like as dietitians, we are never taught this stuff. We're taught to fuel. We're not taught to fast.
Mm-hmm.
Or really like we need to avoid fast because we need to fuel our body. I get that. And obviously I was like at that point, like my friend started doing it. He's like, you need to try this out. I was like, that cannot be good for you. So obviously that kind of sparked my interest into understanding exactly fasting as a way. The biggest part that you mentioned earlier was the whole aspect of religious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
There's about 20, I think it's about, let me just get this right. I think there's about 25 million people that are in the US that are actually Muslims. And that actually accounts for a big amount of people that once a year, and during Ramadan, they have to do fasting by religious purposes. So I did a lecture recently in front of like 300 to 400 sports dietitians explaining how important this is, because we need to understand, for example, from the athletic perspective, is there a disadvantage to people that actually have to do it because it's a religious requirement?
Mm-hmm.
So again, a lot of times, like in most of the research that comes out of intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding, because we didn't really talk about the methods, this is just like the typical one, 16-8. This is something that is being mostly studied observationally, meaning like looking at people and see what happens in Muslims in countries where they practice Ramadan fasting and things like that. Not much of the research has been done. It's been done on people here in the US and like kind of controlling and stuff like that. And it's kind of unethical to ask for a group of people to fast and the other one that can't, just to really control a good research study, because of the fact that it's just obviously unethical. You cannot ask like a Muslim to say, hey, don't fast, like just take a break from this year. So it's obviously become very difficult. But then all this to say this, it's something that It's not a trend. It has become a trend because obviously we're always looking for the next big thing. It's been around for centuries. People have fasted for a long time.
Yeah.
You just need to know how to implement it, and if it's something that actually can be done for you. But you need to obviously ask somebody that knows and that can guide you in the process in order for you to understand whether it's something for you or not.
Totally. And just to wrap up, like, there are 1,000 strategies for fat loss and for weight loss. So this may be beneficial for you. So it's worth a try. However, if it's not, don't be discouraged. There's other ways about it. Right?
Yeah.
So like you have people where you help with it and other people you don't, but they're either one or they're both successful with their fat loss journey.
Correct.
So, okay. So if someone is interested in learning more, you have a course. Tell us more about that course.
Yeah, so I created a 4-part video course. It's kind of like an email course. You get like one video every single day for like 5 days or so. And essentially what I did is I broke it down into 4 pieces. The first one is kind of talking about the history, understanding why fasting has been around for centuries, and understanding also what is really, truly fasting, the medical definition, the different kinds of fast that exist. Then on the second part, I actually talk about the benefits and the health claims that exist and whether or not they're true and whether or not that's something that you should consider. Number three, I actually talk a lot about, I do macro-based coaching. So a lot of my clients actually, they track macronutrients and so forth. So I actually teach them how to organize their food intake in intermittent fasting, and also how to essentially calculate their own macronutrients for time restricted feeding. It's not so much different than anything else, but it's just how to organize them in a very specific amount of time. And part 4 is a Q&A. It's more of a, not a Q&A, but more like answering the typical questions that a lot of people ask, and just obviously kind of talking about how you can implement it to yourself and whether or not it's something that you should do for yourself. So it's a 4-part video course. It's only going to be available for like the first like 150 to 200 signups. Only 100 people already signed up already. So there's still obviously some people that can kind of go in. So maybe just make sure you hurry up when you listen to this podcast.
I wanna watch it. Can I be one of those people? Don't make me take someone's spot, then I'll feel bad.
No worries. You get to get the special treatment. I don't want to use time towards like you'll be the plus one. But yeah, you can actually access that on my website at www.vive-nutrition.com. And then it literally is the first thing that pops up in there. So you can kind of download it. And also you can go to my Instagram, which is at Andres, Andres Ayesta, Ayesta. And that's where I hang out all the time. And you can obviously reach out to me on there. And the link on the bio right now, it's actually the direct access to the course. So you can go in there, put your name, your email, and then you start getting a series of emails that are going to have like one video link on each. I made it and make sure that I added like in separate days. That way you kind of like you didn't get bombarded with too much information. But there's about closer to about 60 minutes worth of video on there. So I think it'd be pretty valuable for people listening and wanting to learn more.
150%. I am like so excited. I'm going to put all that information in the show notes just in case people were driving, couldn't write down those links. If someone wants to work with you one-on-one, is the application on your website as well?
Correct. And if you go to on the same website to online nutrition coaching, you're going to see in there all my rockstar clients and amazing transformations, and you'll learn a little bit more about my coaching process and how it works. And yeah, you can definitely apply it at the end. And I'm currently taking clients limited for the month of August. I'm not sure what this is releasing. So,
yeah.
But definitely
I'm going to release this soon because we tried to record this. It didn't work out, but yeah, I'm going to try to release it. If not next week, the week after.
Okay, that works.
Yeah.
So you can definitely go in and reach out to me and we can have a conversation.
Perfect. Awesome. Andres, thank you so much for coming. I so appreciate it. If anybody wants to ask Andres any further questions, you know where to find him. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Thank you.